I want to walk through the multiple paths in Tropical Coast Zone 1 from Sonic Lost World. In doing so, I will show the breadth of gameplay elements and how they are developed from one segment to another. Because the player can choose their path, they can change the course of gameplay ideas as well. I hope that a specific discussion like this will help you to appreciate just how much your experience can vary based upon your gameplay. Games are finite state machines where the player only occupies one out of many possible states. In a way, multiple paths in a level visualize that. Just like there are multiple routes through a tree of states, there are literally multiple routes constructed in Tropical Coast Zone 1. The level starts on an open field. The area is full of rings and enemies. I consider this a single path because there are no significant changes of elevation, but that's a judgment call on my part. Past the opening segment, the level splits into 3 paths. I would say this is one path along the bottom through the middle here. Then, there's a raised platform on the left, so I count that as its own path. Then, there's another raised platform on the right, so I consider that its own path. I think it makes sense to chunk up the level into paths this way, because level elements rarely move off of a raised platform. For example, rings are stationary, and motobugs cannot run off of a platform. Plus, the camera is permanently oriented in one direction. It is always aimed directly along the tube towards its end. The camera's placement suggests that elements between Sonic and the vanishing point are on one path. Because the camera's orientation never changes, elements to the left and right are perpetually off of the path between Sonic and the goal. Along the middle path, Sonic only encounters geysers and rings. The geysers lift Sonic, giving easy access to the left and right paths. Plus, even without geysers, Sonic can wall run from the middle path up to the left path or the right path. The paths are blurry. There is not much that separates them. If the player takes the drill power-up, Sonic will go to an underwater path. Sonic is on a timer here, and once that timer runs out, he will pop up into the middle path. This is another way in which the level is interconnected. When the timer runs out, Sonic's position underwater will determine where he pops out into the middle path. So there is no particular point where the two paths meet. Instead, the two paths are linked all along their lengths. The left path features crab meats, motobugs, buzz bombers, and rings. This higher path gives a view to the middle path, highlighting a red ring bell on that path. The bell isn't visible if the camera is following Sonic along the bottom of the middle path. On one hand, the camera on the left path invites the player to interact with something on the middle path. And on the other hand, the camera on the middle path obscures that same element. The view from one path helps to show what is available on another path. The left path also branches out to a golden cannon, which takes Sonic to a bonus area. This features another gameplay mode. Here, Sonic runs automatically. This marks the second gameplay mode that is optional after the drill. Rings and crab meats are on the right path. There are also cluckers, but they will only shoot the player if they join the right path part way. This means that players who start on the right path will face different gameplay challenges than those who join the path part way. This is possible because the player can jump to the right path from the left path, or they can wall run up the wall from the middle path. What makes it even more likely, though, is that there is a geyser that will lead the player up from the middle path right into a cluck barrage. Like I said, the player can move from the middle path up to the left path or the right path. The right path and left path can be directly linked as well. The two are so close to each other that it is possible to jump from one to the other without falling onto the middle path. Each path has a consistent internal theme defined by its elements that is distinct from the others. But then, players can swap from one path to another, giving them the ability to opt into or out of one set of gameplay ideas. The drill and auto runner isolate Sonic from the other paths. They lock Sonic into a specific mode with a limited set of gameplay ideas. The design space is focused because there are fewer elements. It also enforces a sequence of gameplay ideas because the player cannot leave a path on a whim. As a result, player choice is limited. The middle path of the second tube takes some of the gameplay ideas from the middle path of the first tube and then develops on them. Similar to the middle path of the first tube, the middle path of the second tube features rings and geysers. It develops past the first tube by adding spike balls. All of these challenges are then layered with a power-up, since Sonic can either take this path normally or inside of a blowfish transporter. In total, this level has 3 optional gameplay modes: the drill, the auto runner, and the blowfish transporter. What makes the blowfish transporter interesting is that it is not isolated on its own path. Instead, it takes the existing level design on the middle path and repurposes it under new controls so that the middle path can be played in one of 2 ways. The underwater path develops past the previous tube by adding a new element, the twister. The second tube's left path also develops further on the gameplay ideas of the first tube's left path. The enemies are the same. There are crab meats, motobugs, and buzz bombers. It even features a gap bridged by buzz bombers and an alternate path leading to another gold cannon. The buzz bomber gap is longer, and the gold cannon is not within immediate view of the left path. The player must wall run up to a raised platform to access the gold cannon. Like the first tube's right path, the second tube's right path is dominated by speed boosters, with most of its space occupied by the distance that Sonic will run automatically. Unlike the first tube's right path, though, the second tube's right path uses animal capsules to entice the player to linger near the cluckers, giving them an opportunity to shoot Sonic. Contrast that with the first tube's right path, which offered a speed booster to bypass the cluckers before they could shoot. Once again, Sonic moves fast enough to move between the left and right paths without touching down on the middle path. On top of this, the level design incentivizes the player to bridge the 2 paths by using buzz bombers. These buzz bombers are inaccessible from the ground, meaning that they are only useful in the context of switching directly from one raised path to another. The middle path of the third tube takes back the developments of the second tube. There are no spike balls or blowfish transporters. The middle path is slimmer, and it is pinched by the bluffs of the higher paths, meaning there is not always a straight line of sight to the end of the path. The bottom path of the third tube similarly drops the twisters of the prior path. In exchange, though, it introduces sunfish with trailing spike balls. While the twisters were tall, thin moving hazards, the sunfish are long, short moving hazards They also offer more interplay than the twisters. If Sonic collides with the fish itself, it'll be destroyed. If Sonic collides with the spikes, he'll take damage. The twisters only offer damage for their interplay. Because this path uses a new element, rather than posing a new challenge with previously introduced elements, I would consider this variation more than development. The third tube's left path features 2 crab meats and a jump using geysers. The smaller space gives Sonic less room to maneuver around enemies, and the higher platforms make it more difficult to get back on the left path if he falls. Rather than increasing the quantity of elements in order to make challenges more complex, this path restricts the amount of space to make challenges more strict. On the third tube, the right path has no enemies. Its second portion is only accessible from a geyser, putting it out of the player's view from the other 2 paths. On this path, Sonic can only take damage during a portion over a spiked pit. That portion requires wall running, which is an ability that has not yet been required by the level. However, the use of a geyser to access an otherwise unseen path does use the geyser in a novel way. This ties in with earlier challenges that have also placed elements out of view. On the second tube, Buzz Bombers linked the left path to the right path, but only if the player looked off of the left path. On the third tube, Buzz Bombers appear directly ahead of the right path, leading towards the left path. To cross back over from the left path to the right path, though, nearly requires the player to use geysers. Sonic's jump is just enough. Even though the middle path is far below, the level still offers opportunities to jump over it and skip directly from one raised path to another. Red rings reward a player that visits every path. By viewing the upper paths of every tube, the player will come across every red ring. Note that optional gameplay modes do not have any red rings in this level. That means the auto-runner segments, the drill segments, and the blowfish transporter do not unlock any red rings. None of the red rings are mutually exclusive either. Instead, if the player has their placement memorized, they can get all of the red rings on a single run of the level. The result of this approach gives the player a gameplay sequence that mixes and matches different gameplay ideas by pulling together different paths. In turn, that means the red rings help to show the power of interconnected paths. If each path is defined by its own elements, and the player is free to switch from one path to another, the player has agency over the meaning of the level. It could be a level about swimming with the drill power-up, or it could be a level about avoiding cluckers, or it could be a level about both, or neither.